One World Trade Center stood tall and imposing, a beacon of resilience, rising from the ashes of tragedy. At night, its spire pierced the sky, casting a faint glow over lower Manhattan, reminding the world of the nearly 3,000 souls lost on September 11, 2001. But as the years went by, whispers began to circulate among the building's staff and visitors. The tower, so grand and modern, had become a symbol of hope and renewal, but something lingered beneath the surface. An unseen presence, or perhaps many, never truly left. People spoke of strange occurrences, elevator doors that opened with no one inside, cold drafts sweeping through sealed rooms, and, most disturbingly, ghostly images of figures falling from the sky. These weren't the kinds of stories that made headlines, but they spread in hushed tones among the workers. Security guards, janitors, and night shift employees told of eerie experiences when the building was mostly empty. Marissa Delgado was one of those workers. A night shift cleaner for several offices in the tower, she had heard the rumors but didn't believe in ghosts. She was practical, grounded in the routines of life and work. Her job was simple: clean the spaces after the employees had gone home, take care of the recycling, vacuum the floors, and be gone before the morning rush. But on her third week working there, something changed. It was late. Around 2 a.m. Marissa was on the 82nd floor, a section of the building leased by a tech company. The office was sleek, modern, and quiet, except for the constant hum of air conditioning. As she vacuumed near the windows, she paused to look out over the city. From this height, the lights of New York twinkled below like a galaxy of stars. She often enjoyed these moments of solitude, where she could take in the view and reflect on her life. But that night, something caught her eye. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, a reflection. A figure, small and distant, was falling. She blinked, her heart racing. But the figure didn't vanish. It plummeted silently, vanishing before it hit the ground. She stumbled back from the window, her chest tightening in fear. Impossible, she whispered to herself, shaking her head. But when she turned away from the window, she froze. In the reflection of the glass, she saw them, shadows, ghostly figures, blurred and faint but unmistakably human. They moved as if they were fleeing, some running, others crouching, their forms flickering in and out of view. The image sent chills down her spine. She turned around, but the room was empty, silent. The rest of her shift passed in a haze of fear. Marissa finished her work quickly, avoiding the windows. She couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. That night, as she rode the elevator down to the ground floor, the lights flickered. The hum of the elevator was suddenly drowned out by a sound, faint, but growing louder. Screams. Marissa's breath caught in her throat. It was distant, as if it came from far away, but unmistakably human. Terrified, she slammed her hand against the buttons, desperate for the doors to open. When they did, she stumbled out into the lobby, her body trembling. She didn't tell anyone what she had seen. Who would believe her? The next night, Marissa didn't want to go back, but she needed the job. As she entered the lobby, she felt the weight of the building pressing down on her. The air felt different, heavy, thick with something unspoken. As she waited for the elevator, another night worker, Robert, approached her. He had been working in the tower for over a year. "You look pale," Robert said, eyeing her with concern. "Everything okay?" Marissa hesitated. Should she tell him? Would he think she was crazy? But something in his expression told her that he might understand. "Have you seen anything strange?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Robert's face darkened. He glanced around the lobby before leaning in closer. "I've seen things," he said quietly. "Everyone has, but no one wants to talk about it. There are shadows. Sometimes I hear voices, like people calling for help." And he hesitated, his eyes darting toward the elevators. "Sometimes I see them. People falling. Just like that day." Marissa felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't alone in this. But Robert's next words sent a surge of fear through her. "Some say the souls of those who died here never left. They're trapped, reliving that day over and over again. The following week, more stories began to surface. An executive on the 101st floor reported seeing a woman, dressed in business attire, running past his office window on the outside. She was falling, her mouth open in a silent scream. He looked again, and she was gone. A security guard on the 90th floor claimed he heard footsteps and frantic whispers in the stairwell, but every time he opened the door, it was empty. And then there were the elevators, doors opening on empty floors, the sounds of people talking just before the lights flickered out. The building, it seemed, had a life of its own. Or rather, it was filled with the remnants of those who had perished on that fateful day. One evening, a group of engineers were working late, fixing a series of wiring issues that had been plaguing the upper floors. James, the lead engineer, was in the sub-basement, checking the main power supply when he felt the temperature drop. It was cold, colder than it should have been, even for a basement. He brushed it off, thinking it was just a draft. But then, the lights flickered. James froze. He wasn't a superstitious man, but the stories he had heard began to creep into his mind. The lights flickered again, and then he heard it, a low whisper, almost like a breath, right behind him. He spun around, his flashlight cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just the hum of the machinery. "Get it together, man," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. But as he turned back to the control panel, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Reflected in the glass of the panel was the face of a man, pale, eyes wide with fear, his mouth twisted in a scream. James stumbled back, his heart pounding in his chest. When he looked again, the face was gone. Over the next few weeks, more and more employees reported sightings. Ghostly figures wandering the halls, shadows that shouldn't exist, and the ever-present sensation of being watched. Some said they could hear the faint sound of phones ringing, people crying for help, and, most disturbingly, the sound of bodies hitting the ground. The phenomenon wasn't confined to the night. Daytime workers began to notice strange occurrences too. One woman, an office manager on the 87th floor, said she saw a man in a suit standing by the window, staring out. When she approached him to ask if he needed help, he turned to face her, and she realized his eyes were hollow, black voids. She screamed, and the man vanished. People began to avoid the windows. The image of people falling had become too common, too real. The building, it seemed, had become a conduit for the past, a place where time and memory intertwined in a haunting loop. One day, a group of tourists visited the observatory on the 100th floor. Among them was an older woman, quiet and reserved. As she stood by the window, gazing out over the city, she whispered, "I was here that day. I lost my husband." The tour guide, a young man in his 20s, nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry for your loss." The woman turned to him, her eyes filled with tears. "I see him," she said, her voice trembling. "Every time I come here, I see him falling." The guide's smile faltered. "What do you mean?" She pointed to the window. "There. Look." The guide hesitated but followed her gaze. And then he saw it, a man, in a suit, falling. He tumbled through the air, his arms outstretched, his face frozen in terror. The guide gasped, but when he blinked, the man was gone. The woman turned to him again, her voice barely a whisper. "They're all still here. All of them." As the years went by, the hauntings became a part of the building's lore, whispered among employees and visitors alike. Some believed the spirits were trapped, unable to move on from the tragedy that had taken their lives. Others thought the building itself had become a vessel, a place where the past bled into the present. One thing was certain, One World Trade Center, a symbol of hope and resilience, was also a place of shadows. A place where the lost souls of that terrible day lingered, their presence felt by all who entered. And as the sun set over Manhattan, casting long shadows across the city, the whispers of the dead grew louder. They were still here, watching, waiting, and falling, forever falling.